Okay, so today I'm going to be giving the most factual analysis that I can of the current Russia situation, using sources here that even the mainstream media would consider credible. There's two people that I've been listening to very closely when it comes to this Ukraine conflict analysis. That'd be Colonel Doug Macgregor, who is often seen interviewed on CNN to Fox News, to former UN weapons specialist Scott Ritter, who's been on the world stage for a long time. There's videos of him on the Senate floor talking to Joe Biden. I love hearing both of these two talk because it's so difficult during wartime propaganda to listen to people who don't seem so biased. I'll be providing links in the description to the fantastic interviews that have been given with these two individuals. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Colonel Doug Macgregor said it's been confirmed that the SAS, which is the British, they were behind the Crimean bridge attack. He said the British are far more audacious than even our own military and secret service. However, this bridge attack resulted in minimum damage, and it was repaired very quickly by Russia. He said it was strange that they attacked the bridge instead of trying to interrupt Russians' railway systems, because Russians' rail covers a mass distance, and this is what they predominantly use to bring resources to the front line. The Crimean bridge isn't used for this, so it seems like the core goal of destroying the Crimean bridge was for a PR move or a morale boost. Some of you may have noticed that immediately after this bridge attack, the Ukrainian government postal service created stamps in honor of the bridge attack. It was huge news. The media touted it as a huge success, but in reality, it didn't slow them down at all. And that seems to be the entire theme of this war, where Ukraine has PR and influence on their side, and Russia just has raw power on their side. Ukraine's counteroffensives have been suffering heavy losses with Russia. You may have seen on the news, many outlets are celebrating that Ukraine took over Lyman to Bakhmut to Kharkov, but they didn't add in those articles the sheer heavy losses suffered by Ukraine in doing so. And not only that, but they held these cities for a very short time until Russia just came back in and took them over again. The very few kilometers they managed to scrape out have been lost. He says that it seems that Russia is doing modest pushback to straighten the lines and prepare for a major offensive due in November. That's when the ground freezes. And there's that old adage of never invade Russia in the winter. And Russia views Ukraine as a part of Russia, and they view NATO as the invaders. It's not good to fight Russia offensively or defensively during this season. We've seen that throughout history. Whether it's the Nazis to Napoleon to the Swedes, they all learned that tough lesson. And also recently, Russia has had a very successful counteroffensive, where Russia fired 202 missiles, and 27% of which were shot down by Ukraine, but they destroyed 80% of Ukrainians' air defenses. Which is why I think I'm seeing a lot more videos out of Ukraine of these drones and these planes just flying over and bombing these targets without any pushback. There's videos of Ukrainians with AK-47s trying to shoot down these drones to no avail. And there's this fear in Washington because they thought that they could bully or intimidate Putin, and it's having zero effect on him. It seems as though Putin has been preparing for this for a long time. He's well tapped into his own resources. All the gas and power is running smoothly in their country. I mean, they seem stockpiled and ready for this winter. And then what do we see on the Ukrainian side, where a lot of their power is already out? Ukraine is getting desperate for men. In some of these videos, you can see the elderly to 16-year-olds to women, young women fighting, soldiers with tennis shoes on. And these Ukrainian civilians who are fighting are being told that Putin is coming to take over all of Ukraine and all of Europe, but also saying that his military sucks. Which one is it then? The whole narrative doesn't make any sense. And this is not at all credible information, but there's been a few posts I've read on Reddit of people who are over in Ukraine right now who volunteered with their foreign legion, and they said it's terrible. They're not prepared at all. They're sending them in with guns with barely any bullets in them. The more I research, the more it really seems Ukrainian people are being used as cannon fodder for the special interest groups who want to weaken Russia. Like the neocons in the United States, and the Biden admin has said that they want to just weaken Russia. And that's why they're sending billions of dollars of our US taxpayer money over there, and using these Ukrainian civilians, telling them that Putin is trying to take over all of Europe, which is a false narrative, because if NATO truly believed Putin was descending on Europe, they'd be in all-out war right now. There'd be no proxy war. And the United States has always been given the script of insane war criminal dictator, from Saddam Hussein to Gaddafi to Assad. I mean, what makes you think this is any different? Say what you want about Putin, but I don't think he's just a stupid, raving madman. I think he's very calculated. And it seems as though NATO has been underestimating him. So yeah, further commentary from the colonel when the interviewer asked him, "What do you see going on in Russia during the winter?" The colonel said that Russia has all their fuel and heat infrastructure intact, and the Ukrainians can easily end up freezing and starving. It could be over by winter. And this goes along with what Scott Ritter has said. Ritter's talked about how Russia is focused on taking out Ukrainians' power grid, and they've already destroyed 40% of it, and they plan on taking out 100% before the winter, especially with Ukrainians' air defenses now down by 80%. Ritter said that this conflict has been a long time coming. The United States has just outwardly hated Russia for so long because the Soviets dared to stand as our equals. They dared to try to act like they could compete with the United States. And after the end of the Cold War, we just treated them like a defeated enemy instead of letting them join NATO. When Putin tried to join NATO under the Clinton administration, but they said no way, they wouldn't allow it. Because Putin's like, okay, instead of us being enemies, like, why don't we all just join together? Putin said, NATO is there to keep me in check. And he's like, you don't need to keep me in check. I can join you guys and we can all just work together. And NATO said no, because that would no longer justify NATO's existence, in my opinion. That's why they didn't do it. And NATO has been weakening itself in the last few decades by exhausting itself in the Middle East and fighting these little goat farmers and not focused on combating larger adversaries. They don't know what it's like to fight a large enemy anymore. Russia is a totally different foe from Afghanistan to Iraq. However, the Russian military has been expanding since 2008. In 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, and it lasted 1 week, and Russia won. But the key takeaway from all these war analysts was, wow, Russia is not strong enough to take on NATO. They were looking at their weapons and their manpower. Even though it was a victory, it was a stark difference. But the thing is, Putin realized this was true as well. Putin realized, wow, they're right, we cannot stand up to NATO. So since that time, they focused pretty much the core of their efforts on building their military and creating it into a more modern fighting force. So then we saw Russia again in 2014 with a conflict in Crimea, and that was a starkly different military from 2008. And now we see them again in 2022 there in Ukraine, and that again is a totally different military from 2014. And they've been evolving so quickly because they've had one primary focus, and that is to beat NATO. And then on the other hand, in the United States, our procurement system is the most inefficient imaginable. We spend $800 billion on our military budget, and we're still way behind quotas. Russia, on the other hand, has only spent $48 billion each year recently, and completely transformed their military from 2008 to now. And the reason why our military budget is so inefficient is because so much of it goes into other people's pockets. It's corrupt. Like, for example, this was a good example Scott Ritter brought up with B-1 bombers. The parts to create these planes are purposely spread out to factories all over different congressional districts. And the Air Force doesn't want or need these parts, but Congress continues to buy them to keep these factories running in their districts. Russia does none of this nonsense. They're completely focused on what is efficient. They don't care about using their military-industrial complex to line the pockets of politicians. Sure, they have their oligarchs over there, but that's a different issue. So yeah, every major congressional district has a vested interest in the B-1 bomber. And that's been the approach of almost every major military program since the creation of the B-1 bomber. So this isn't just limited to that one specific plane. This is happening with countless different military machines, and it's just lining the pockets of congressmen. It's the definition of weak men creating hard times. Because of greedy people, our military is not up to par, and it's not from lack of money, it's from lack of direction. So anyway, moving on. Russia's 300,000 new troops are ready for combat 2 weeks ahead of schedule. You probably heard they did that military draft and they got 300,000 fresh new troops. As I'm recording this, the date is October 19th. And as of very recently, Putin has declared martial law in his 4 newly acquired regions of Ukraine. Moscow is also under high alert since the daughter of Dugin, Putin's advisor, was assassinated in a car bomb by the Ukrainians, and that has been confirmed. It was them. When you get deeper into the Russian Federation, though, life is normal, things are fine. But yeah, the reason that they're removing all these civilians under martial law, especially in Kherson, is because the Russians are afraid the Ukrainians will blow up the dam there and kill the civilians. And they're trying to create a distinct buffer zone by evacuating all the civilians. That way there can be no sabotage from Ukrainian military dressed as civilians. There's no questions there, because after the martial law is complete and they see a civilian outside, they'll just simply shoot him. There's not going to be any question. There's no cars that will be allowed to come in. Any cars that approach will be greeted by gunpoint, and if they fail to slow down, they'll simply be shot. So there's no risks of cars coming in carrying bombs and blowing up. It'll be a distinct buffer zone, and then Russia will be like, all right, we're ready for war. Because it's been Russia's goal from the beginning to limit the amount of civilian casualties. So with the civilians out of the way, they'll just be able to go full frontal. The whole place will just be a battlefield. So yeah, Kherson has been a very important strategic city that Russia has taken over, and every attack on Kherson from Ukraine has failed. They sent over a bunch of troops over the waterway to attack the nuclear power plant. They're all dead. They came in with 2 battalions after that. They're all dead. All of the resources of Russia are now coming down on Ukraine. It seems like they're not playing around anymore. Ukraine, recently has been having parties celebrating that they're doing so good. They're not doing good anymore. We seem to have this idea in the West that if we just keep throwing money at something, then it'll work. But we can see with our inflated military budget, for example, that's just not the case. Resources need to be allocated effectively. It doesn't matter how much money we give to Ukraine if they don't have the manpower to secure these thousands of kilometers around the border. Our tax dollars are being sent to a futile conflict where the Ukrainians are using civilians as cannon fodder. There's no way they can win this war. That's what every major expert who isn't completely biased is saying. I think this winter is going to be a huge turning point, where not even the mainstream media will be able to hide the losses on the Ukrainian side. So either the West will concede that it's a losing cause, or there will be an escalation of NATO involvement. And it's troubling when you see articles out of Newsweek that talk about how the neocons and the woke left are joining forces to start Woke War 3. And it's such a weird combining of forces, but honestly it makes sense. Because both of these sides, from the neocons to the woke left, they don't want this conflict to end. They want escalation. That's why I say it's not a right or left issue. It's honestly common sense people versus the neocons and the woke left. That's the way I see it, at least. You're welcome to disagree with me in the comments. And that about concludes the Russian war analysis for the month of October 2022.